We're so fortunate today to be with you all. This is our English USA town hall. We did one of these back in 2020, and I was looking over the notes from that time, and I remember things like talking about markets changing, reactive changes to policy, whether or not policies at institutions varying, returning back to in-person. And we thought that was a crazy time. And here we are again, about to go through a little bit of a transition. But what we wanted to do today, bringing together four great panelists for you, is to break down, to come together. Gathering together, community is always important to us, but to talk a little bit about what's happening with markets around the world. Our panels are going to introduce themselves for a second, but that's Ivana, and how national associations, not only English USA, but also NAFSA and the Alliance and others, are kind of stepping up, what's going on now with them, and then get some insights from programs on the ground through the insights and wisdom of Mark Algren. So I know many of you have been navigating some complex waters right now with your English language programs, and today this space of coming together so that we can share some experiences and strategize a bit about the future, and in this case, our collective future, right? Before we dive in, I want to acknowledge the resilience in the room, the virtual room. Each of you likely represents an institution, or maybe our accrediting bodies or an association, but we are all committed to cross-cultural understanding, language education, and creating academic and professional and personal pathways for students. So our panels are going to take us on a journey. We're going to start globally, as I mentioned, from the global market perspectives to more nuanced policy landscapes that we're going to be navigating, and exploring some of those challenges and opportunities. So the little piece of housekeeping is, I love to see people's faces, so I'm glad to see people's faces. Daryl and Carolyn are going to help a little bit with questions. We'll bring those to the panelists at the end, but each one is going to give a little short perspective. I was going to say little, huge perspective, but short perspective from each of the areas. And then we'll move into Q&A from you all. So we're going to kick it off with Ivana, who's going to talk to us about some global perspectives. Since I do have the names on the screen here, I'm going to shut the screen off. And then Ivana and Joanne and Mark, if you can introduce yourselves when you start your section. Thank you.
I should go ahead then, if we start with the global perspective. So hi, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you today. I am Ivana. I'm the International Education Director at Bonart. And we've been actively doing data collection and working closely with associations in all the 8 major ELT destinations. So that kind of helps us to have that global perspective, to understand what's going on, and to maybe help you to sit where the US kind of sit in that global context. So that's what I'm going to do for next couple of minutes, just to guide you through what happened in 2024, how does that affect the 2025 from that global perspective, from other destinations as well. So I'm going to rewind a little bit more than just at the 2024, and go at the very beginning, maybe the end of 2023, when there was a certain level of optimism in the sector, because we finally saw an increases after 2022. We saw increases to 2023, and there was a good sign after COVID that the industry is kind of coming back. That was the beginning of 2024. However, that this year, oh no, it's 2025. So last year actually proved to be another difficult year for the sector. So what happened? What were the major developments, and how does that affect the 2025? When we usually talk about the sector as a whole, we talk about 8 major destinations, and out of those 8, there is the big 4. That's Australia, that's Canada, that's US, and it's the UK, where majority of the English language learners are there. The hopes at the beginning of 2024 is that there is going to be a continuous upward trajectory for the sector, and it's going to come slowly but surely back to 2019 levels. That's not going to be the case because of all the happenings in the other destinations. And I'm just going to start literally in alphabetical order. If we start with Australia, they actually had a record high year in 2023, the largest number of students, the largest number of weeks we have ever seen. However, this had been noticed by the government, by the population, because there were accommodation shortages, not only for students, but in general population, which was driving the prices up. So the government took that as a signal that there is a need for an intervention, and they already started doing something that it's now called in industry as a soft caps on international students, and they started to regulate the influx of students through visa refusals. Some nationalities went up from visa refusal rate being at 10% to being 80-90% of visas being declined going into Australia. And this all started a debate on should Australia also introduce international student caps, meaning limit the number of student visas that are granted to students on all levels across the sector. This debate has been going on for months and months in Australia, and at the end, in November, it actually wasn't passed. It didn't go through Senate, and officially the international student caps are not introduced in Australia. However, throughout the year, because of the uncertainty, because of the government communication, because of the soft caps being already in place, that has significantly affected the sector. And the sector is actually expected to decline anywhere between 30 to 60%. So we're going to see a large drop for Australia because of the lack of communication from the government, because of the regulation in student visas. Students were not confident to go there. Even those that decided to apply, there were mixed messages and mixed negative marketing coming out of the decisions taken by the government, and the reputation damage has come into effect for Australia. We have a very similar story for Canada, with the exception that Canada actually approved their international student caps. So there is already an existing framework that limits the number of student visas that individual providers can grant to students. And this has been already announced for the next 2 years. Again, it's not maybe the kind of reason behind with the lack of accommodation and the quality assurance would be great if this was actually communicated clearly to everybody. But that uncertainty that was brought by first announcing that there is going to be caps, and then there was a vacuum when there was no communication, nobody knew what's going on. And then suddenly the caps were introduced and the providers needed to navigate, brought again a reputation kind of challenge for Canada. From the feedback we have heard, some of the providers didn't even meet the cap, so there were not enough students to actually fill the cap or the allocation of the cap that was given to them. So Canada also, because of this handling of visa and student visa, they're also going to face declines in 2024. However, those going to be slightly smaller ones. It's going to be about 20%. And that's because they shifted heavily their focus, especially the English language sector, to drive the students through different routes, be it, tourist visa or ETA. Now, UK didn't have such a huge announcement. They weren't planning to limit international students, but government still intervened. They have done several decisions that affected students, that affected the English language sector. The latest one was that they revoked the visa-free entry for Colombian students, for example. So UK, out of those big four, was still doing fairly okay in 2024. However, they were not growing. There is other reasons to it, but one of them is definitely the government kind of putting a pressure on the sector. And that brings us to the US. With US, there are two things. Visa refusals and visa processing has still been noted from the agents and from the sector as an issue for the US. And this is kind of has been going on for years now. So this is kind of the perception that US now has, that it's very difficult to actually get visa and to be granted an entry to the US. The other element is definitely the election. So that has brought, when you think about it, the average age of an English language student, and with the increase of junior students, the main decision makers are parents. Parents are concerned about safety, and everything that had been going on in 2024 with the election and then the campaigns and the messaging around didn't necessarily scare people off, but they put on hold their decision to actually go ahead and apply and study in the US. They're still kind of waiting out what's going to happen after the inauguration speech and what will be the stance of the new administration on the international education. So there is still a certain level of I would say hope, that the sector might still benefit, because there is a part of the mobility that didn't go to Australia, they didn't go to Canada, they didn't go to the UK, that leaves US with the potential to attract those students. However, there has to be also a favorable conditions for the country to attract the students. Last two things I'll just mention. Anything happens on the 20th, there is going to be need of a communication. This is a big learning from Canada and from Australia, that uncertainty brings only negative kind of information and reputation. So anything happens, it might be a difficult communication. There still need to be a strong communication to outside world to reassure the students that this doesn't, or this affects you, but it affects you in this way, or it doesn't affect you in any way. The other thing is, I do want to point out that associations such as English USA, or if we are talking about English UK, Languages Canada, English Australia, they are playing a crucial role for their membership, because there is a power in numbers, and the only way how they are trying to help, and this is the way how they are trying to help with the government to advocate, to bring the voices to their attention. And it's been a battle, and it's been a long and difficult year and years for the associations, but it's still much better position to have than being an individual provider trying to kind of navigate in those difficult times that are ahead. And that's where I'm going to end kind of the global introduction.
Thank you, Ivana. We're going to move to Mark Overman, if you can introduce yourself and your role and give us some insights.
Sure. Thank you, Cheryl. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm so happy to be speaking on this panel with so many great colleagues and listening to their insights. For me, from the Alliance perspective, going from Ivana's take at a global level, I'm going to take it down to the US level, and specifically, of course, the new dynamic we have in Washington, D.C., the new presidential administration and the new Congress that just got started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark Overman, Executive Director of the Alliance for International Exchange. The Alliance is a DC-based association that comprises the U.S. international educational and cultural exchange community. So our members are organizations and associations like EnglishUSA and NAFSA, among many others, who are working in the English language program and international higher education sphere, as well as many of those NGOs that are running international exchange programs of all kinds, very specifically the State Department's exchange programs. That is a main focus of ours. And so we are fundamentally an advocacy association representing our members' interests on Capitol Hill with the State Department and with other government agencies, among many other things we do in terms of communications, thought leadership, and events. For my remarks, I just wanted to touch on a couple of different topics. One, the somewhat long list of the challenges that we are tracking and potentially anticipating with the new administration in Congress, the new administration, of course, starting this upcoming Monday. Two, I just wanted to give a brief note, both positive and less positive, on some of the key presidential appointments that are already in place or pending. Three, just a brief note on the new dynamics in Congress. Of course, a Republican-controlled Congress, both the House and the Senate. And finally, just wanted to give what I think are three key points for advocacy when you're all thinking about how do we stand up to both protect and try to advance our programs in this new governmental environment that we have coming up for the next year, 2, 4 here in DC. First off, when it comes to the challenges for international educational cultural exchange, for language programs, English language programs, higher ed, here's a number of things that we're tracking, probably a lot that are no surprise to you. One would be the potential revival of travel restrictions, similar to those that were implemented in the first Trump administration, often in early 2017. That could be the quote unquote Muslim ban, a travel ban of people from 13 Muslim majority countries that was struck down in court during the first Trump administration. There's talk that it would come back. Second would be the quote unquote China initiative, an effort to prosecute potential so-called Chinese spies in American research and industry. This is something that was, I think, widely seen as totally ineffective and terribly disastrous, but there has been talk about a revival of that as well. A second thing we're watching would be the restriction of certain exchange programs or visas, specifically like J1 exchange visitor programs, the Bridge USA program. Back in 2017, the Buy American, Hire American executive order in the first Trump administration was one that was nominally focused on work visas, on H visas and other work visas, not exchange visitor visas. But unfortunately, exchange visas, especially programs with a work component, ended up getting drawn into that in very negative ways. And it took huge advocacy efforts from our whole community to draw ourselves out of those and for those programs not to be severely restricted or, as was the talk at the time, completely eliminated. This is a clear and potential threat that we are very much focused on and hope that we won't see, but we are prepared. A third threat would be funding for all of our programs writ large. Specifically, we're focused on funding for Department of State exchange programs. Obviously, you've probably all been following at a macro level the funding battles already taking place both in Congress and among those who are floating around the spheres. It is going to be a messy funding environment this year and going forward. Messy in all ways, I think, including a lot of infighting among the newly empowered Republican majorities in both the Senate and the House. During the first Trump term, there were proposed funding cuts of 50 to 80% every year of those 4 years for State Department exchanges. Luckily, Congress pushed back on those each and every time. And in fact, there weren't cuts, but exchange funding grew during that time. I think this time around, we do expect more proposed cuts from the Trump administration. The dynamics in Congress are different, though. And what I worry about is, do we have the same dynamics that we had in the first Trump administration in Congress, in which we can rely on our key allies there, both Republican and Democrat, to push back against those proposed cuts? It's a different environment, and therefore, I think the dynamics are going to be very different when it comes to funding. We're looking at a potential pressure on or a slowdown in visa issuance. What form that might come in, I don't think we know, but we are definitely worried about the potential, whether it's specific executive orders or actions, or even just more the slow walking of visa issuance to be a potential thing to happen, if not just in key regions or countries, perhaps around the world. So again, not exactly sure what that could look like, but we're keeping our eye on it. Another thing would be very likely to be pressure on OPT, on optional practical training. Maybe that's something my colleague Joanne would get into more, but it's possible that the administration might seek to restrict or eliminate portions of OPT, including STEM OPT, and maybe include new requirements across the board for OPT recipients. This is something the community is very focused on. A second to last challenge would be potential immigration challenges that aren't necessarily or in any way focused on our programs or community, but we might get swept into anyway. One recent example of the last few days is the Laken-Riley Act that's currently making its way through Congress. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, this is named after a young woman who was tragically murdered in Georgia and by an undocumented immigrant. So the impetus of this act is to really up the ability of not just the federal government, but states to be able to detain and potentially deport undocumented immigrants who have certain criminal records or crimes on their record. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is this would also provide states and attorney generals in states the ability to sue the government, sue the State Department to stop visa issuance from certain countries who might refuse to take deportees. It's a very complex bill, I think, but unfortunately, this one very specific issue, which we have been advocating along with NAFSA and many of our other colleagues to get out of there, might still end up there. This is just one example of the fear that we might see immigration-related legislation, executive orders, or activities that might draw us in, whether intentionally or not. And the last challenge we're tracking is potential pressure on the civil service. What's known as Schedule F. And this would be basically stripping civil servants of their employment protections, possibly even firing them and replacing what have traditionally been civil service appointments with political appointees. This is something the previous Trump administration talked about, didn't move along in enacting, but there's been talk of reviving that idea. Just to touch briefly on key cabinets and appointments, there's many out there, as I know you all see in the news, and too many to touch on. Two I will touch on. One, from a good news perspective, Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. Senator Rubio is a very traditional Republican in the sense of foreign policy and his support for exchange programs, language learning, study abroad, and the State Department. I think his appointment is something of good news for our field. And his confirmation hearing was just yesterday. And in fact, much of what he said was what you would expect him to say, what you might want him to say. And I think he's somebody who will hopefully be an ally within the State Department for the things that we care about. I would say in the not so good news department would be the appointment of Stephen Miller as White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. This is not a cabinet appointment or a Senate confirmed appointment, but it's a very important one. And Stephen Miller in the first Trump administration was a key architect of a lot of different policies and strategies that were meant to restrict international movement and immigration of all different kinds. When it comes to Congress, of course, as I mentioned and you all know, we have this new dynamic both of Republican-controlled Senate and House, but also of incredibly slim majorities in both, especially the House. This is going to make, frankly, getting anything done very, very challenging. The two main things that we're looking at right now in Congress are, one, how is funding going to take shape here over the next 6 months? And that's both finalizing funding for FY25, which is currently, despite being nearly halfway through the fiscal year, not finalized, in continuing resolutions and very up in the air. At the same time, there's going to be the president's first budget of this new term for FY26. What will that look like? And how will Congress balance finalizing 25 and looking at 26? And how are the levels there going to play out? When we're thinking about advocacy, it's really hard to advocate for next year when this year isn't even done yet. So this is going to be a real challenge. And the way in which Congress gets it done, in whatever fashion that is, I think is going to show us how it's going to be able to work, Congress as a whole. And like I said, I don't anticipate it to be smooth in any way, shape, or form. And then the second thing would be, as I mentioned with the Laken-Riley Act, what immigration-related legislation will there be? How is it going to flow through Congress? And what impact might it have on us? And finally, let me just give you those 3 advocacy points that I think are really crucial to this new environment, things that we are trying to keep in mind at the Alliance that we're communicating to our members, and I think are really great for everyone to keep in mind. First, it's local advocacy, showing impact at home to your members of Congress in your home districts and states is absolutely crucial. Not just the positive impact, but also showing what would be lost to local communities, to local businesses, to local economies, if not for our programs. Second would be messaging that focuses on how our programs promote the United States and are an investment in America. This is something I think we all know and talk about anyway, why our programs are not just good for international relations and diplomacy, but also really good for American students, American communities, American businesses, American families, etc. This is the messaging that we need to lead with, and that is going to be the way in which we're going to find new allies. And to that end, the last thing I'd say is we are going to be very focused on what we're terming as relentlessly seeking common ground with anyone and everyone we can, including new members of Congress, those in the new administration, beyond. So much of what we do is good for the policy priorities of the incoming administration and the Congress. And it's on us to seek that common ground and do everything we can to show them that, to show that you may not think of international as key to your agenda, but it is. Let me stop there and turn it back to Cheryl and look forward to any questions later.
Thank you, Mark. We're gonna move along to Joanne Hartman. Joanne?
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. Good to see familiar and new faces here. Thank you for taking time to join us today, and as always, appreciative of English USA, including NAFSA in your programs and discussions and ongoing activities. Joanne Hartman, Senior Impact Officer and a long fan of English USA. And know the hard work that you all do. And Mark Overman, to your point about, local impact and relentlessly seeking common ground. I love that piece because I think that's what it will take, right? We focus on the differences so much that I think it's going to require us to look at what's common ground, what's good for everyone, in locally and nationally as well. So I'm here to talk a little bit more about what's NAFSA doing, what we're following. I think similar along the lines of what the Alliance is doing, tracking bills, legislation, following all kinds of different things. And to Mark's point about the Lake and Riley bill that's going through right now, I think it's important to note that sometimes you may not think, oh, it applies to international education. How does that apply? That's the role, I think, of associations like ours and coalitions to track that and to decipher that, if you will, because it can get overwhelming, and it will, I bet, get overwhelming, right? All those challenges that Mark had referred to and referenced, right? I think it's very important within the community. So English USA, for instance, right, focuses very specifically on the English language programs. And I think it's important for us to realize that we have communities of support for everyone, right? So if you're seeking community, I would go to Cheryl and Daryl and, within your community, right? The larger picture umbrella of NAFSA as an association, we do work alongside other associations like English USA, the Alliance, TESOL, to really have one voice. And we may have sometimes a different approach, but I think now again, more important than ever is to have that one voice. So what are we doing, not doing? We are preparing, we're planning, and we'll respond as appropriate. We're not going to respond to every single little thing. Because there will be so much to respond to and prepare for. So NAFSA is very committed to being able to provide resources and be a resource hub, right? We remain steadfast in our priorities, some of which Mark mentioned, OPT, for instance, visa denials that Ivana mentioned, or delays, right? Path to green card, dual intent, all those different things. So we were going through the first Trump administration. They started looking at DS, duration of status, towards the end of the administration. So what does that mean? Does it come back? Does it not come back? So we're tracking things like that and going through within the first administration, what they did then and what potentially could come now. You've heard about Project 2025. Some of you may have even read it, in there buried is a mention of the chummy relationship that SEVP has with higher education. So what does that mean? So, with people such as Stephen Miller in the White House and writing a lot of those policy initiatives that we know, we're going to be watching. So it takes a lot of detail I will say on my Facebook post this year for the new year, I posted poised and focused. And I think that's what we're going to have to do, is being poised and not overreacting, but also focusing on the mission and the critical things that we do to support students on our campuses and the important work that we do. So Resource Hub, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm going to focus on the practical side, right? So we currently have some web pages that are up already, and I'll pop them in the chat when I finish my portion of this. We have a Practical Immigration Concepts in a Time of Change webpage that's got evergreen resources. So if you need a refresher on what an executive order is, we will have those resources. We'll put out a couple of different recordings as well. Sometimes it helps to understand the foundational pieces before you start reading what's out there, right? We will also be launching, alerts and banners. If you visit our webpage, if there's an alert, it will appear. We'll be messaging out in our networks because we strongly feel very, very much, and I think, everyone will agree, education is important. Not just to our members, but you may need that piece to educate people on your campus, your allies, or your challengers, people who are not your champions and not on your side. You may need that information, right? So education is very, very important. We will have call to actions. So if you are not signed up for CoWorld, please do so. I think that's, another way you can also see what NAFSA is following, tracking what progress we've made. So connecting our world. Thank you, Cheryl. We have acronyms and jargon that we use. The power of convening. I think it's important to realize also that associations convene together. The Alliance, Cheryl mentioned, Advocacy Day, that's just one event, but we will have many more. Now, where do you spend your time most effectively? This is the communication piece. And I think for all of you that are convened here, you can look to EnglishUSA as your source of communication because you will be getting tons and tons of sources of information. So I think it's important to know that, whether you're going to subscribe to all 10, all 50, or do you rely on your association that you go to? Know your sources of information. So I've mentioned the NAFSA hub, and thanks, Daryl, for putting the policy and advocacy take action there. I'll pop some more there. A couple of different things to mention coming up as well. On January 22nd, Fanta is going to host an IE30 on LinkedIn. It's called Charting a Course in the New Political Environment, along with our president, our new NAFSA president of the board, Ahmad Ezzadine. So that will be on January 22nd. And of course, that's open to everyone. I think I'll stop there because there's a lot and I'm cognizant of time. But I'll pop the links in the chat and feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Such a good reminder too of the communities within the communities, right? And then the individuals within those communities. Okay, Mark Algren.
Yes, Cheryl, and if I get on the roll and keep going, tell me to stop at some point, okay?
Okay.
It's too easy to do. Anyway, I'd like to likewise say thanks to everyone for attending today and reiterate again the importance of advocacy for all of us. And if you're not a member of EnglishUSA or a member of the Alliance or TESOL, get involved with one of those because we have stories to tell. As Mark said, our representatives, our senators and representatives in Congress appreciate having the stories, things that illustrate what is important, and we have stories to tell. So let's get our stories out there. My name is Mark Algren. I'm the interim director at the Applied English Center at the University of Kansas. I've been involved with the Commission on English Language Program Accreditation, CEA, recently stepped down as a commissioner, and with TESOL and other organizations. And it's always a pleasure to work within this group and present some of the findings. I've been, I hate to use the word, but I can't think of another one right now. I've been blessed. I really have been. To have the opportunity to come back to KU as the interim director of the AEC, because my task is not to be the operating manager of the program, but rather to undertake the development of a strategic plan to help move the center forward, not just to keep it alive, but to help it thrive over the next 5 to 10 years. Part of the work that I've been doing is interviewing a number of colleague directors from around the country, my own faculty, staff on our campus, and people in admissions offices and other related fields from other institutions. This is all connected. AI is a great challenge to our field, both for our classroom work and how students use it to go through our courses, but also how we're going to teach them. But it can be a great benefit to us in analyzing large amounts of data. That's what I've been doing the last 2 or 3 days, is trying to extract out of all of this raw information, what are the key points that keep coming up. So I'll run through these in, I think, a bit of a hurry, but my boss has encouraged me to say, you've got some kind of a presentation here, or you've got something in writing that is impactful for the entire field. And colleague directors have said, I'm jealous. I've wanted to do this for years, but I have to run my program. It takes all my time. So I hope there will be things here that are hopeful. One of the things that we're aware of is that our enrollments are in flux for language programs. While the open doors information that came out in November looks to show how our numbers are increasing, if we also take a look at recent information from CBUS by the numbers, we see that in this current election year, our numbers are declining. Year on year, English language program enrollments have dropped 6% fall 2024 compared to fall 2023. Is that an aberration? Is there something happening? But we'll see. We're going to need more data to show if there's actually a change coming when we get some other data from the State Department regarding tourist visas and other types of visas that will come out in the next month or so, and see if there are correlations like there were in 2016. We can't say that that was a cause, but certainly it looks like it. There are market shifts where the traditional places have been, where our students have been coming from. We all know who we've had and that they've been drying up, disappearing. But there are some new ones that seem to be coming to the fore. We have more enrollments. The top sending countries for language study now are in Latin America. They're coming from Brazil and Colombia. Vietnam is on its way up. Bangladesh, believe it or not, is one of the top 10 sending countries now to the United States for language study. So we can look at other areas and look at how those numbers are changing and what the trends are. We've got also, there appears to be a good possibilities coming out of West Africa. So there's more interest, but as Mark mentioned, we don't know what's going to happen with visas. And we all know the various stories about the slowness of getting visas out or being denied visas, especially when it's for a language study program. Things that other directors and other people who are related to our field have mentioned is growing demand for short programs. Things that could be 2 to 4 weeks. They're customized if you have within an institution, or an institution, if you're a proprietary, an institution that you're related to or have a close connection with. What are strengths that they have that you might be able to build on? Can you get faculty from the law school, from engineering, from somewhere else that want to help offer a short course that has an English and a culture program? We want to have all those things rolling together. A name that seems to be coming up now, I don't know if it's really official, but I think it will become that if it isn't yet, is English Plus. So maybe the focus is in English, but we add on some other things for professional development that people are going to find of value. Graduate student support. The challenge here is finding out who's going to pay for it. We have the skills and the knowledge, the cultural knowledge to help international or non-native speaker graduate students improve. A program that we had several years ago at the University of Kansas, when we had to close it down, long story, short version, it doesn't matter, it happened. 50% of the enrollment were domestic students, but it was designed for non-native speakers. There's a demand for help with graduate writing. And of course, we probably heard about youth markets. A recent IELTS study, I think I saw this in Inside Higher Ed, maybe not, is a story about rankings. Of course, you know, students don't come looking for a language program. They look for their academic course and then come to a language program. But rankings aren't as overarching as they seem to be. They're a starting point, and then lots of other things come into consideration. So it is still valuable for institutions and programs to look at what do we offer, what differentiates us from other places. Some of the programs located in really attractive places, like, for example, New York City, Los Angeles, Miami, you think they've got it all, but there are great attractions to being in the middle of the country as well. Find ways to play those things up. What makes you different and what makes you special? Several directors have emphasized the importance of becoming embedded in your institution, knowing an institution's mission, what their values are, and finding out how you can support that. And then as Mark and Joanne have talked about advocacy on a national level, anybody who's a director or an associate director, people who are working within your program that are on campus, what can they do to advocate for your program on campus? I was recently in the office of the Associate Vice Provost for Student Success, and they got so excited. They said, you know, I'd forgotten that we had all of this there, and we have another meeting set up already to see what we can provide. And he brought up, well, we're going to have to find a way to fund that. So I was really excited about it, but it was an office we hadn't been to in a very long time. So those things, there are so many other things I could go on about, but Cheryl, I think I just need to stop there. And I'll get something written for you. Okay, I promise.
Cheryl,
Thank you, Mark.
can I add a couple of things here? Thank you, Mark, for that insightful information. I do want to also encourage us to think about the long game, right? Some of the work we do is in for the long game. It takes strategy, intention, and focus. It's not a short sprint. Administrations come and go. I'm always reminded NAFSA is 75 years old, you know, that we remain steadfast in our mission, just to Mark's point, you know, find out what the mission is, know what you're doing. So we're in it for the long game. So back in 2016, some of you will recall that Grassroots started a hashtag "You Are Welcome Here" campaign. It's still in existence. NAFSA administers it. Please use that hashtag because it's so important. We saw this groundswell of "You Are Welcome Here" hashtags, people posting, you know, fun videos of orientation, of field trips with international students, and it was building community. So I'll pop the link in the chat also so that you can see some of the scholarships, schools and scholars that are currently on the program. And we're going to run some stories about alumni of those the "You Are Welcome Here" program as well. So thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome. And Joanne mentions this promotion of the United States, as did Mark Overman. And I know on a daily basis, right, you're not thinking, no, we're promoting the United States as a premier destination for study. I mean, but we are, right, in these stories that we tell about our students. I put something in the chat also just about that local promotion in you know, they're not going to come to you, right? Reporters, et cetera, need to be told about success stories and feel-good stories about students within your community. So thank you all for mentioning the word promote a few times. At this point, maybe you're feeling overwhelmed, optimistic, or somewhere in between. I know I always feel that way these days, but optimism comes out for me in these when associations come together with other folks. We are in it together. So I have not seen any questions pop up in the chat. So I wanted to just be quiet for one more second before I ask a question.
Cheryl, I'll chime in just to build on your optimism note while you're thinking of other questions, because I agree with that. And despite the fact that I spent a lot of my time giving a long list of challenges and worries, I also really share your optimism that we as a broad, diverse, and incredibly active and passionate field are well set up to take on the challenges that are coming, because we've done it in the past and we're ready to do it again. And it's in fact those past challenges and the way that we've responded to them, and I think the strategies that we've seen work and not work, the broad communities, coalitions, et cetera, very broadly defined, that we've built, that were really active and successful then, are still there. And in fact, I think stronger and ready for this kind of the kinds of challenges that we have coming. I just know that the days after the election, I felt very empowered. I felt like I knew what I needed to do, what we needed to do. We don't know what's to come, but I felt there were so many levers ready to pull, so many people ready to talk to. And so many folks on this call and others that we should have a sense of optimism. We have strength as a field, and we shouldn't forget that. In fact, we should keep that at the forefront of our mind all the time. Whatever the challenge is, we are able to meet it. So I feel I appreciate your note of optimism and wanted to echo that.
Thank you, Mark. We've got someone who's feeling a little sad.
Sorry, I didn't mean it.
I mean, we all, I mean, there's some, we acknowledge it. We are aware of it. But can you address the impact of the potential removal, or the Department of Education, the talk of dismantling the Department of Education, and the effect on higher ed and international students?
I'll be happy to comment on it, not knowing a ton. And if there's anyone else, any of the other panelists who have more, certainly that is something that has been talked about at this broad level. I think just sort of fundamentally, logistically, bureaucratically, getting rid of an entire department would be an incredible lift and very, very difficult to do, and would require a lot of buy-in from Congress, not to mention, I believe, an act of Congress. So just bureaucratically, it would be an incredibly challenging, I think, if not impossible thing to do. I think it's important too, when we were talking about cabinet appointments, the appointee to be Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, who, among other things, is the wife of Vince McMahon of wrestling fame. I think she will not have an interest in dismantling the department that she was given the opportunity to lead, and likely for very public-facing reasons. That doesn't mean there won't be a ton of challenges there, that there might not be attempts to make it smaller, make it, quote, more efficient. I think there will be extreme funding challenges for Department of Education programs, international programs, similar to the Department of State. I guess I'm optimistic, though, that the idea that education would be abolished or significantly shrunk is probably unlikely to happen. But again, I'm saying that as an opinion, not so much based in any sort of specific fact or real insight that I have. And I don't know if any others have more or better thoughts on that.
Mark, I'm sorry I hope that I'm not detracting. I wanted to actually ask a question sort of related to what you mentioned there earlier regarding Project 25 and the relationship between the Department of Ed and the acronym. I didn't write that down. I just wanted to get that for my records. Could you explain that to me again?
So which acronym?
I have SAVPT. I don't think that's what it was, but maybe I'm completely off board. I thought
SEVP.
There we go.
Gotcha. Yeah, Student Exchange Visitor Program,
Gotcha, thank you.
Department of Homeland Security.
And Mark, can I Can I ask you a question about Schedule F? I remember wanting to ask you this when you gave the talk in December.
Sure.
Schedule F, what you mentioned related to civil servants and the just being hired or fired in a different way. I'm assuming that if that indeed happens, that affects visa consular officials. Is that true?
That's a great question. I can't pretend to be a total expert on what that could be, but I think theoretically, yes, it could impact anyone throughout the government, including foreign service officers or consular officers. I think more likely the impact would be on civil servants right away, of which consular officers would not be foreign service officers. But the broader point of the effort is, frankly, to take away the employment protections that civil servants have long enjoyed within the government, and to, one, I think, force attrition therein by, frankly, whether it's not firing them, forcing resignations, and then replacing some, if not all, with political appointees, thus, from a political perspective, bringing in, quote, your people rather than having apolitical government civil servants. But I defer to any of my colleagues who have more insight into what the, quote, Schedule F effort from a Trump administration could look like.
I just wanted to add, Mark, that's such an important point, right? And another part of the association work that we do is building relationships with our agency partners. Most of them are government officials. They are career professionals in the government service. They are not political appointees. They report to political appointees. So I think it's also important, my silver lining from that, right, if you had to have a happy takeaway, is that we still have those relationships established from many, many, many years and hours of advocacy, building on relationships, and hopefully, you know, I don't know much about Schedule F, to that it doesn't impact that on the ground level, the work that we as associations do, to I guess put up guardrails, to put up, you know, things that make sense, common sense, and you know, is helpful to the field. So that's my takeaway in terms of thinking about the long-term strategy and relationship building, that we still have career service professionals in the government and not just political appointees.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Joanne, that's such a good point. To build on that, just as an example, within the Department of State, tomorrow, the 17th, will be the final day for political appointees, of course, before the inauguration on Monday. But from the Department of State, Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs side, really that's just a few people. That's the Assistant Secretary, Lee Satterfield, and a couple of Deputy Assistant Secretaries. To Joanne's point, the vast majority of people there are civil and foreign service officers, career officers who will remain, have been there through many transitions already, and will remain. So we retain, to Joanne's point, those strong relationships with those people. And really their work is influenced by kind of the high level priorities of political appointees. But the way the programs fundamentally function over the years chugs ahead in all the best ways. Of course, the Schedule F threat would be that those civil servants are actually at a deeper, more and more junior level, replaced by political appointees, which would then have the ability to force programming in different directions that might not be in their best interest. So the hope would be, of course, to Joanne's point, that we would keep that core level of civil servants who know the programs, whatever they might be, backwards and forwards, and are going to advocate for them and push them forward no matter what.
Thank you. I'm glad the word relationship came up in that response, because those, again, with EnglishUSA and the relationships that we've built as well, we're going to be 40 next year, by the way. Those don't get ripped down and torn apart overnight, right? So relationship building is so important. There was a question about temporary protected status with the new administration. Daryl answered that, and that there has been an extension, but I don't know if our panelists can answer this about the status of TPS and change of status. What might, you know, longer processing time. I mean, I guess it would be all speculation. I'm looking at Mark Overman.
I don't know about TPS. I
Okay.
can't pretend to know there. I agree with you. There'll probably be speculation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of those long delays from years ago, man, it was also COVID related. So I'm not quite sure if we will see delays immediately with the new administration, but we'll see.
All right. Any other questions? I didn't push the button. I'm going to push the button. Yes, silver linings. I wrote that when Joanne said it, and I didn't push the button, so I'll hit it. Okay. Well, I'd like to share just a few things. You know, visa denials have come up, right? And English USA has been approached by many folks. You know, what can we do about visa denials? And of course, educating with our agencies when we have sessions. We invite the government agencies as well. Often they say the same things, but they are invited to the table to make sure that they hear our voices. But just to let you know, one movement that we made, knowing that there are a lot of denials in Turkey, we're going to be partnering with ISEF in Istanbul in March. So English USA will be present at ISEF and doing a seminar for the agents there on minimizing visa denials. Haviva Parnes is helping us with that. So we can't, you know, it's hard to, you know, to tackle all markets. We are doing this as kind of a pilot to see if we could, and specifically, obviously for English language programs with visa denials. So look for more information on that soon. And then I need to do this part too. We have a lot coming up. Our professional development conference is next week. Tomorrow happens to be the day when you can still get a discount. So that's why we're promoting it today. It's not until the 31st. So we have a couple of weeks, but it's a great event. You know, lots of speakers, 20 different sessions across the board: teaching, curriculum, assessment, marketing, recruitment, professional development, evaluation of teachers, etc. And then mark your calendars for the 29th. We're doing a great webinar with Jackie McCafferty, Renee, I know some were on the call, Thomas, and Ben Waxman from INTED. We always have to make the case for recruitment travel. Everybody has to make the case. English language programs sometimes in particular need to make even a stronger case, those on campuses and also private ones. Oh, look at that. We have an opportunity coming up. We are going to Merida, Mexico in April. So we have a few slots left. It actually is pretty full. So going back to the other one, if you need to make the case for this particular event, we can perhaps help you with that. And then we're doing a FAM tour in New York with Languages Canada. We have figured out that I think this is the first time that two countries have worked together to bring students to a continent, North America. So we're pretty excited about this event. And we're about half full with that. And then I know Jeff Hutchison was on the call. We coordinated with Jeff Hutchison, but also at TESOL to do a pre-convention workshop. Super excited about that as well. So if you have faculty that are attending TESOL, if not yourself, consider this. And our annual conference in October, which we're doing a save the date much earlier than we ever have because we're shaking things up a little bit. We're going to have an educator track and an administrator track. So there'll be more options for sessions and such. Thanks for letting me do the promotion for English USA. I want to thank Mark and Mark, Ivana and Joanne, always, you know, strong, informative voices for English USA. And for those of you who are not as familiar with English USA on the call, please know that we work closely with all these folks to make sure that we are promoting the US as the destination for language study. Thank you so much.